Good morning, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome back to Law and Crime Live. This is where we cover some of the most interesting live trials in the country today. And we have a very, very busy day for you today because we are continuing our coverage of the Tex McIver case out of Atlanta. We saw some very interesting testimony yesterday. I'm going to get all into it. Again, this is the case of that prominent local attorney from Atlanta who is charged with the murder of his wife, Diane McIver. Okay, he's accused of shooting her from the back seat of a moving car. But he is saying, his whole defense team is saying that this was a tragic accident. He didn't intend to kill his wife. But as you can imagine, the prosecution is not buying any of that. They're saying that he wanted to kill his wife, mostly for financial gain. And we'll talk about who testified yesterday, the masseuse. That's right, there's a lot to talk about with her. And now, again, I'm keeping a very careful eye on the courtroom. We're waiting for a live feed. As soon as it starts, we'll make sure to jump into it. But before we do that, before we talk about anything, I do want to preview another case for you, a case that's going to begin Monday, and I don't want you to miss it. So it's very important that you hear about this one. This one is a case that's taken forever to get to trial. It's a case out of California. We expect opening statements Monday. It's the trial of Robert Lars Pape and Kristen Conrad Smith. They're both 29 years old, and they're charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and special circumstance allegations for taking multiple lives in the same crime. They're charged with killing 18-year-old Becky Fridelli, her mother, 53-year-old Vicky Fridelli, and Vicky's boyfriend, 55-year-old John Hayward, on the night of September 17th, 2006. 2006. Look how long it's been taking to get to trial. Now, if convicted, Pape could face the death penalty, while Smith could face life in prison without the possibility of parole because he was a juvenile at the time of the crime. Again, we expect opening statements Monday. We are going to cover it here live on Law and Crime. You do not want to miss anything. Do some research this weekend on lawandcrime.com about this case, and you'll be prepared, and we'll talk all about it on Monday. But right now, our focus is the Tex McIver case out of Atlanta. And yesterday, Annie Anderson, the masseuse for Diane and Tex McIver, testified. And why was she brought out by the defense? Because the prosecution in their case intimated that she had an inappropriate sexual relation with the defendant. And in a case where the defendant is accused of killing his wife, looking like he was two-timing, you could see what the prosecution was trying to do, and the defense was not having any of it. Here is some testimony from Annie Anderson.
Did you ever have a romantic relationship with Tex McIver?
Never.
Massage therapist Annie Anderson took the stand in the murder trial of prominent Atlanta attorney Tex McIver. McIver stands accused in the shooting death of his wife Diane. The prosecution believes the defendant had financial motives for the killing, and they even insinuated Anderson had a sexual affair with McIver. When pressed on her status as the defendant's alleged lover, Anderson remains steadfast. She massaged the couple. She never had any sexual relationship with Tex.
Did you ever touch him sexually?
Never.
Did he ever touch you sexually?
Never.
Did you ever at any time, I'm talking about any time, before Diane McIver's death or after her death, either before September 2016 after September 2016, engage in any sexual conduct, however you want to define it, with Tex McIver?
Never.
On cross-examination, Anderson even kind of admitted she felt intimidated by the prosecution during a pretrial interview.
You were persistent about some things that I didn't know anything about.
Okay.
That just made me uncomfortable, and I remember crying the entire 3.5 hours.
After that intense back and forth, when jurors were asked to leave the room, the prosecutor kind of backpedaled, claiming he never had any evidence of Tex having an affair with the massage therapist.
And to be quite frank with you, there is no direct evidence that she had sex with anybody. And so the court is absolutely right. I would lose all credibility if I stood up in front of this jury in the closing argument and said, oh, the evidence has shown this torrid love affair between, and I'm not going to do that.
For Law and Crime, I'm Rachel Stockman.
Who knew a masseuse would cause so much trouble in the courtroom? And speaking of the courtroom, we have a live feed in the Claude Tex McIver court. We see the judge on the bench. I think we have a live feed we can show to our audience. But what I want to do right now is bring in my very special guest for this morning before trial starts up. I'm here with Law and Crime trial analyst Yosha Gunasekera. Yosha, great to see you.
It's great to be here.
All right, so you saw the masseuse testify. I thought it was important testimony from multiple angles. What did you make of it?
I thought it was very important testimony, too. First of all, she needed to deny that there was any sexual relationship between her and Tex, but then a lot of other interesting information came out. One of the interesting tidbits was that he falls asleep every time, or almost every time, he gets a massage, which is critical here to the defense.
Not only does he fall asleep, he flails around.
Exactly.
He flails around, and in a case where you say, oh my gosh, he fell asleep and the gun went off, I'm starting to see, and maybe there's some other people who were in the anti-Tex McIver camp and might be saying, well, wait a second. You know what that sounds like to me? Reasonable doubt.
Exactly. Not only does he flail around, it apparently is so violent that sometimes the masseuse, has to back out of the way. So it's very telling testimony and very helpful for the defense.
We saw a sleep expert come on the stand a few days ago. Also said Tex McIver suffered from a sleep disorder. I think the defense is doing a great job here. I think they're doing a great job of really trying to poke holes in the prosecution's case. They did it, I think, really well under cross-examination of the witnesses, but now it's their turn. The case is in their hands. How do you think they're doing with each witness that they're calling?
The defense is doing great. What they're doing is they're rebutting everything that the prosecution is saying. And so that's exactly what they did with the sleep doctor. And the sleep doctor was able to testify that Tex has had these issues for years. I think they date back to 2004 is when he started to get some treatment for the sleep issues. So it's not suddenly he's accused of murder and he has a sleep issue. It's that these have dated back many years.
Okay, so the jury is entering. Court is about to begin. We don't want to miss anything. As soon as we have the audio, we're going to jump right to it. Again, this has been an amazing case. We expect that the defense will rest maybe even later today or Monday. It should be noted that the prosecution stated they have a very short rebuttal case, but we do expect closings looking like on Monday. This has been a long case, Yosha. Real quick, before we get into it, what does the defense have to do today?
I think they have to keep doing what they are doing. They don't have many more witnesses to call. They're going to focus on the prosecution's case that is just, frankly, at this point, such a mess. Prosecutors are just trying to throw everything out and see what sticks.
Well, let's see what sticks with this next witness. Again, let's listen in live. All right, everybody, that's Mary Margaret Oliver. She is Diane McIver's estate administrator. She's being cross-examined by the state. Let's try to understand what's happening. I'm here with Yosha Gunasekera. Why do we care if Tex McIver was paying family members, Amex bills, his personal, an assistant out of the estate of Diane McIver? Explain it, how it fits into the larger picture of this murder trial.
Well, it goes to the motive. So essentially what the prosecution is trying to establish is that he killed her intentionally and then is trying to use all of this money to benefit himself and to benefit his family.
That's not unusual. A spouse dies and you have to pay money out through an estate. I mean, it sounds like the majority of these things were related to the administration of the estate. Do you see something different?
Well, part of what I think the prosecution is trying to get at is this: ultimately, if he is convicted of murdering his wife, he's not going to have access to any of that money. So maybe they're trying to draw upon, he's trying to spend it very quickly, he's using it for himself. But I agree with you. I think it is the financial motive part of this case is weak.
Do you believe that the main prosecution's argument here, that the financial motive is weak? So if we don't buy the financial motive, and two of the influencing witness charges were just dropped and were dismissed, what does the prosecution have?
I don't know at this point, and I think it is very significant that the judge dismissed two of the charges. I think that sends a strong signal as to the prosecution's strength of this case. Basically, after the prosecution closes, the defense has an opportunity to do something called a trial order of dismissal. Which is what happened here. They're allowed to say the prosecution did not have enough evidence to even present to a jury on charges 6 and 7.
So, Yosha, I'm going to ask you the million-dollar question since we're talking about money right now. Will Tex McIver take the stand?
I hope not. I don't think he should. I think that they have a strong case as it is, and I've seen cases really crumble when the defendant takes the stand.
Maybe we'll have an answer later today. All right, everybody, let's go back live into the courtroom. Well, that was fun, trying to understand what is appropriate and not appropriate to do with the state administration. Yosha, is that a good point the state's making? Is it appropriate to pay these charges out of the estate?
I don't think it's a good point because it's really subjective, and ultimately you would think that it would be up to the jurors to try to determine whether, you know, using estate funds to pay for a PR person was looked bad enough to make and convict Tex of murder. It's just a very odd line of questioning, and it really is making the prosecution at this point, in my opinion, look very desperate.
Well, let me ask you a question. Is it inappropriate in general when someone passes away to use that money for personal expenses in general, or does it always have to be related to the estate?
No, of course not. People often use their loved ones' deceased funds to continue to keep up their quality of life. And I think many people who pass away want their families to be able to use that money. That's why people have life insurance. So their loved ones are taken care of after they pass away. So it's not unusual at all.
See, I think it was just a situation where, I mean, you could look at it like this, right? I'm playing devil's advocate. So in the way, if you want to support Tex McIver, couldn't you just say, she died? Obviously, there's a question about him shooting her. But if you just look at the actions afterwards, maybe not picking up the remains, selling her jewelry and fur at the behest of, at the advice of a lawyer, isn't he just doing the things that someone would do after their spouse dies? Or is it just so suspicious because of what happened, how she died?
I think it makes Tex look like a greedy, callous person for
Right.
sure, but there's a difference between being a bad person or not a very considerate or kind person and then killing your wife. And I think the prosecution has done a great job of proving that he's a devious man, and he's done a lot of things that many of us would not do if our spouses were to pass away. But I don't think that they've achieved proving whether he committed a murder or not.
Isn't this just part of the larger picture of the prosecution's case? In other words, if they could definitively point out that Tex intentionally shot his wife, his hand was held out, outstretched, he shot her, totally clear as day, they wouldn't have to do the whole motive, right?
No, they wouldn't. The motive would be icing on the cake. If they were able to say that he put that 12 pounds of pressure on that gun and pulled the trigger and it wasn't an accident, then we wouldn't be here. And frankly, I think this trial would have been much shorter. I think they're trying to put out everything and hoping that one of these things is going to grab at least one juror's attention and try to sway the other jurors.
Do the jurors see through that, do you think? Do you think they see through the fact that the prosecution might be really hyping up this this whole motive theory, because when you look at what actually happened in the car, we're not sure what happened?
I would hope so. I would hope that the jurors are seeing through the prosecution's case, and I think that was really well demonstrated with the masseuse's testimony, because the prosecution was definitely putting down the fact that she was potentially, or at least alluding to the fact that he was in a romantic relationship, and then suddenly you hear the DA Rucker say, "Oh no, we would never do that. That would make us lose credibility." It looks bad, and I think the jurors can see that.
They've gone with a lot of different ways for why he would have killed her. Diane was tough to be around, financial, two-timing with the masseuse. I mean, throwing in the kitchen sink is an expression, and juries, correct me if I'm wrong, they don't like to see that.
They don't like to see that, especially in this case where what they're throwing out there is unsubstantiated or is later contradicted by either their own witnesses or the defense witnesses.
Yosha, let's turn back into the courtroom.
I will rephrase the question.
Don Samuel, the DA, the district attorney, district defense attorney, excuse me, couldn't get out what he wanted from this witness at the beginning, but really did get out trying to understand that there was no sexual relationship between Tex and this masseuse. But I want to talk to Yosha Gunasekera really quick about that objection. Did you agree with the judge's ruling that what she suffered, or what her family suffered as a result of being accused of having an affair with Tex McIver, that's not appropriate for this trial. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that decision because ultimately it's not relevant to the case at hand. The prosecution is not questioning or challenging her credibility at this point. So the fact that the defense attorney is then saying it goes to her credibility, it's not quite on point. He did get out what he wanted to, was the fact that they didn't have a sexual relationship. It's going one step too far in asking how that affected her life outside of this trial.
Right, and he got out the most important part. There was no affair. Now, maybe the jury will believe it, maybe they won't, but it was important to hear nonetheless. I want to continue playing some of her testimony, and again, we'll go back live into the courtroom after this. Look what the masseuse did to our feed. Terrible, terrible, terrible. I'm here again with Yosha Gunasekera. Again, so the prosecution really has been going to different avenues here, right? So they've been saying, okay, listen, this is an affair. This is a financial motive. I want to talk to you right now about the idea that Diane McIver wasn't the nicest of people. They kept bringing this up earlier in the case, that the fact that she had a sharp tongue. We saw messages she sent to Tex McIver saying things that weren't that nice. Does that hold sway with the jury?
Again, the prosecution is trying to go to motive of why he would want to kill her, that she's just not a very nice person. But again, they're missing the mark. They're doing a great job of presenting people's personalities, but they're missing the mark on proving their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I don't think it's going to sit well with the jurors.
Well, we don't understand what happened in the car, right? I wasn't there. Yosha, I'm pretty sure you weren't there. But we know Danny Jo Carter was there. And again, she said there was nothing out of the ordinary, right? But my question is, you don't really know what goes on in the mind of a person before they shoot someone. Now, again, we can assume that he intentionally shot her in this example. If he intentionally shot her, right, we don't know what the reason could have been. Maybe he didn't like something she said at that very moment. So does all this motive stuff, does it really matter? Because at the end of the day, if you can show that it was a shoot, we know he shot her. Does it really matter what the reason was?
I mean, you never know why anyone does something, especially if they're not going to testify as to why they did what they did. But in this case, if they don't have motive, they have nothing. Because again, there's competing ballistics experts that are going to say he did it intentionally or he didn't do it intentionally, and that's very hard to prove. So without motive, they don't have anything here.
Yosha, stand by. We have a live feed in the courtroom. I just want to show a 3-box right now. You'll see that there's a sidebar going on between the judge and the attorneys. As soon as the trial starts back up, we'll make sure to go to it. But, you know, one of the other things, Yosha, that I didn't get a chance to speak to you about is 2 of those influencing witness charges were dismissed. What did you make of that? That was a big blow to the prosecution's case.
It was a huge blow to the prosecution's case because, remember, they're trying to build up Tex as this really nefarious person who has been trying to sway witnesses, trying to get charges dropped, and that, again, goes to motive. And what's really interesting is the judge found that there wasn't enough evidence even to present those charges to the jury, which is a huge blow for the prosecution.
Huge blow to the prosecution. You have to also think that it might have been a huge blow with Andy Anderson testifying. Our clip was back from Andy Anderson testifying yesterday. This is the masseuse. Again, right now, Mary Margaret Oliver, Diane McIver's estate administrator, is on the stand. We'll go back to a live feed in the courtroom in a minute, but I do want to play for you the continuation of Andy Anderson's testimony from yesterday. Take a look. There's so many interesting things about this case. One of them is looking at Tex McIver, as certain witnesses have testified. Look how he was reacting to the masseuse's testimony. But the other interesting thing is that the jury is able to ask questions during this case, and that's what's happening right now. They're reviewing jury questions. So, Yosha, we have to be real quick, but I'm curious about your thoughts. Juries being able to ask questions in the middle of a trial, what do you think?
I think juror questions are so wild. Unfortunately, we don't see them in New York, but there's such an interesting view into the minds of the jurors. You're based on the questions, you can see where they're at, and you can tailor your case to what they're thinking, and it's just so interesting and unusual.
That's interesting you said that, because it's a split opinion. Some people say it does give you a roadmap about what the jury's thinking and what they're taking as important from the testimony. And then you'll have others say, well, they might ask a question. We have no idea why they might ask it, and it might not even give you an idea. Okay, let's listen in live to Judge McBurney reading the jury questions. Okay, so Mary Margaret Oliver, Diane McIver's estate administrator, was just on the stand. They're going to call their next witness. I'm here with Yosha Gunasekera. Yosha, who do you think they might call next?
Perhaps a rebuttal witness for the gun. I don't think we've heard that yet. That would have to appear today if they're going to arrest. So I would imagine that would be their next.
So what what was the main idea that they would want to get out?
That it was a hair trigger, that it can't be proven that he put 12 pounds of pressure on that gun. Perhaps the gun was malfunctioning. Anything, again, to stir in some reasonable doubt and combat what the prosecutor's gun expert said.
Yeah, I mean, that really is the key here, isn't it? What happened with the gun? Did you require 2 pounds of pressure, 12 or 15 pounds of pressure? Could we know? If we don't know, does that mean that it's reasonable doubt? We see this next witness coming to the stand, and remember, we're all waiting patiently. We all don't know. Let's listen in live for this next witness. All right, everybody, let's listen.
Do you swear?
Okay, as we try to understand the qualifications from this next witness, trying to understand the crime scene, I want to talk about that crime scene with Law and Crime trial analyst Yosha Gunasekera. The crime scene's unusual here in that it's a car. How does that differ here? You know, you don't have a standard crime scene. So how does it differ in these kinds of cases?
Well, a car obviously is mobile, so it's going to change in ways that a house or another place that doesn't move changes. So that's interesting. Also, when this crime occurred, the vehicle, it's unclear whether the vehicle was stopped, whether it was moving. We have testimony as to one way or another. So it's a very transient crime scene. And really, this expert is going to rebut the fact that the prosecution is saying there's no way the gun could have gone off in his lap. And what they're trying to prove here is that it's totally plausible. They're trying to fit what happened into the defense's narrative.
And we've talked about this with other guests. The car is a very public place, okay? So if you're going to shoot and kill your wife, would you do it in a car that's in a public area and with a witness driving?
No, that adds to the absolute absurdity of this case. It would be a very odd way to try to kill your wife.
Then I'm going to play devil's advocate. Maybe it's ingenious. No one would suspect that this is a murder if I did it in this fashion.
I suppose, but doing it with a witness, and there really does seem to be some warmth that Tex has for Danny Jo Carter. He didn't want to involve her in this case, so then to kill his wife in front of her seems a little strange, but it's 2018. I guess anything can happen.
So, Yosha, you think that him telling her, I don't want you to be a part of this case, don't tell police, you thought that was the goodness of his heart, not that he was trying to cover this up? Again, because he is charged with influencing a witness.
Well, I definitely think it's partly him trying to cover it up. I think since this incident happened, he's been thinking that he's being stealthy and a smart lawyer by trying to cover up his steps. It's obviously only made a bigger disaster here. But I think at the end of the day, they were friends. If he was trying to intentionally kill his wife, he probably wouldn't want to get her involved.
All right, let's listen in a little bit more to this new witness. You know, as we listen to Ross Gardner, crime scene analyst, giving his qualifications, it's an issue that's sometimes overlooked. I want to talk to Law and Crime trial analyst Yosha Gunasekera about this. It seems standard, you know, talking about what are your qualifications and who you are, but doesn't that become a hotly contested issue between attorneys?
Yes, it definitely becomes a hotly contested issue because the opposing side, in this case, the prosecution, can challenge his credentials. Has he testified before? What does his schooling look like? Again, you can't just put anyone on the stand because what he's saying is he's giving testimony that a lay person cannot give, and so you want to make sure what he's saying truly qualifies him to be an expert.
And juries feed on that. So when an expert's cross-examined by an attorney and they question his qualifications, I feel like that might stick with a jury.
Certainly. Ultimately, it's up to the judge whether the person becomes an expert, but then the jurors are making up their own mind on whether they find him to be credible. And it's very important in this case because you're seeing two competing sides. You're going to see the defense present an expert, and then the prosecution has presented an expert, and ultimately it's up to the jurors to decide who is more credible.
All right, well, let's listen to this expert testify in the Tex McIver case. Okay, interesting part there in the direct examination. Yosha, did you catch it where they question sometimes an expert about how much they're getting paid? That becomes an issue, doesn't it?
It shouldn't become an issue because everyone has to get paid for the work that they do, but one side or the other will try to make an issue and say, obviously, you're going to testify beneficially for the defense because they're paying you this type of money. But again, this is a person just like any other who has a specific expertise and is getting paid for that expertise.
But you do have two crime scene analysts. You have one for the state, one for the defense, disagreeing. You see this a lot of time, experts disagreeing. So why would the facts, if they are the facts, how could they be interpreted by two different people in two different ways unless there is a bias, right?
Not necessarily. There's many reasons for why certain things happen. And again, it's unclear if they could prove definitively that Tex put 12 pounds of pressure, then this might not even be a trial. So there really are two sides. And the state is also getting paid. The state expert is also getting paid by them. So I think there's that argument on both sides. It's going to come down to credibility.
It's an argument. It's an argument. Will it work? If they decide to make it, maybe, maybe not. Let's listen in live to Ross Gardner. Well, that was huge. The barrel of the gun could not be held in an upright position. It is physically impossible to hold the gun like this, meaning it had to be like this, meaning it had to rest on his lap. That is huge for the defense. Yosha, unfortunately, I know you have to leave now, and I have to sign you off, but you're leaving at a terrible time. We just learned something huge.
It's quite riveting testimony. It's going to be very interesting to see how the prosecution handles this.
Everyone, Yosha Gunasekera, thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait to have you back on.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, everybody, let's go back into the courtroom. This is a big day, a big witness for the defense.